Welcome to the Jenna Ellis Show, sponsored by Legacy Precious Metals. There has never been a better time to invest in precious metals. Visit legacypminvestments.com. That's legacypminvestments.com. Good evening and welcome to Jenna Ellis Tonight. So the FCC has a new rule that is essentially forcing and compelling religious broadcasters to conform with diversity, equity, and inclusion rules. So I had Walker Wildmon, who's the vice president of the American Family Association, that along with the National Religious Broadcasters Association is suing the Biden administration for this rule. Here's what he had to say.
This is about publicly reporting your employee hires and your employee statuses with the Federal Communications Commission, specifically as it relates to sex, race, religion, and other factors. And what this is getting at is this is basically DEI for the FCC, to put it in layman's terms, as far as what the issue here is. And so we joined with the National Religious Broadcasters Association to sue the Biden administration just this past Friday in federal court. We filed the petition in the Fifth Circuit because that's what jurisdiction we're in. But the suit is asking the Fifth Circuit to review and basically strike down this FCC rule that they put forth that is going to require our organization and hundreds and even thousands of broadcasters around the country to participate in this diversity, equity, and inclusion nonsense.
Joining me now is Abe Hamilton.The, who's general counsel for the American Family Association and also the host of the Hamilton Corner on American Family Radio Network, where I also host Jenna Ellis in the morning. So Abe, thanks so much for joining. And I want to get more into the legal of this because obviously this is a very concerning issue that religious broadcasters specifically are being forced and compelled by the Biden administration's rule for this type of diversity, equity, and inclusion, when specifically that, of course, goes against Christian theology. So what exactly is the claim or the remedy that you're seeking in this case?
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Jenna. The remedy that we're seeking is simply to have the court rule that this FCC regulation is unconstitutional and to alleviate broadcasters, and this applies to radio and television broadcasters. All radio and television broadcasters would be forced to comply with this if it's allowed to stand. So the remedy we're asking is for the courts to rule that this is unconstitutional and prohibited from being enforced and imposed upon all broadcasters in the United States of America. And what's important to note is that this isn't new. The same rule, it's a requirement, the specific form is Form 395B, which would be used by the FCC to require broadcasters to report demographic data for its employees. In the 80s and 90s, the court stepped in and slapped down this rule, saying this is an unconstitutional governmental overreach. Well, the Biden administration said, hold my ice cream cone, and goes a bit further in saying that not only do we want to collect demographic data, but we're going to add an additional category and require for these broadcasters to also let us know whether or not they have any gender conforming or gender non-conforming employees. So you have the form that's already been found unconstitutional, yet you have the additional gender identity category added, and it simply is a tool being used by the same Biden administration that sought to rewrite Title IX to the Civil Rights Amendments of 1972. That same Biden administration is now seeking to compel broadcasters to adhere to its gender identity insanity. It really is a grotesque governmental overreach, an abuse of power, and we expect to prevail through the court system.
Well, I would expect you to prevail, especially because this has already been slapped down, and yet the Biden administration is going further. I mean, this seems so brazen that the administration is just totally flouting the law and saying, well, we don't really care what was ruled in the 80s and 90s. We're going to go ahead and do whatever we want, and we're going to add on more to it. And so where's the accountability for these Biden administration officials and actors for, it seems like, knowingly putting in these rules and these requirements in place that they know clearly are unconstitutional?
You're absolutely right. But this is the same Biden administration that forbade homeowners and property owners from being able to collect rent, imposing a rent moratorium on property owners through the CDC. This is the same Biden administration that had its own advisors say that you really can't do that student loan cancellation thing that you want to do Yet they do it anyway. The court had to slap them down again. This is just another iteration of the Biden administration's lawlessness and their complete disregard for what is lawful or what is not lawful in an effort to say, we don't care what you believe. We don't care what is right. We don't care what is legal. We want you to conform to our view of what should be legal. And so they are forcing us to require the courts to intervene to remind them that this is not a monarchy, that this is still a constitutional republic, and that we still have a constitution that must be respected, even if you are an occupant of the Oval Office.
Yeah, and I hope that we still do have a constitutional republic. It seems like increasingly the Democrats are just ignoring that, and the Biden administration is just ignoring completely the rule of law. And unless and until courts intervene and hold the Biden administration accountable, then we're going to continue to see this. But but Congress tried, at least with the impeachment of Alejandro Mayorkas, to hold some of the Biden administration actors accountable for completely just ignoring, for example, immigration law. And so where's the political will here to hold the Biden administration accountable, even beyond just a courtroom and litigation that may take years and well beyond, even a second administration if he gets that far? I mean, it seems like Republicans just are kind of, stepping back and letting all of this happen.
Yeah, it's sad. I mean, you have the logistical reality of the Republicans having a very slim majority in the House, and you have the Democrats having a majority caucus when you consider the independents in the Senate. Because the fact is that elections do have consequences. And so though the congressional makeup may not allow for immediate accountability to be imposed upon the Biden administration, I truly hope that the voters will do so in 2024, not just at the top of the ticket with the presidential election, but really this is a large opportunity for the Republican Party to make great inroads in the Senate, because there are more Democrat Senate incumbents that are attempting to protect their seats than there are Republicans. And so that the accountability will have to, it appears at this juncture, to come from the American people. And subsequent to that, hopefully some institutional accountability will come from Congress itself.
Yeah, and the process has to be important. And it seems like, Abe, that is what the Democrats are the best at, are using and abusing the process to create the political outcomes and legal outcomes that they prefer. And Republicans and strategists aren't so keen on actually using the process. It's more the politics and talking points in the media. But I think this lawsuit is a great example of how you're using the process to try to compel the appropriate and constitutional outcome. So in just the last 20 seconds, where do you go from here in terms of the next step of the lawsuit?
Well, the regulation was announced last Friday. On last Friday, we filed our petition in the Fifth Circuit. There are other cases that are coming in. So at this juncture, we're waiting to see how the appellate circuits will allocate those cases. Hopefully, it will result in a circuit split, and we can get this issue all the way up to the Supreme Court to have a once and final declaration that this Form 395B must be filed into the dustbins of history, never to be resurrected again.
Amen to that. We're pulling for you. Thanks, Abe. We'll be right back with more. Well, as the question of truth continues to be prominently in society and what the church can do to influence culture and eventually politics, there is a brand new book from Meg Basham from the Daily Wire that is titled Shepherds for Sale: How Evangelical Leaders Traded the Truth for a Leftist Agenda. And so Meg joins me now. So this is a really, really important book, and you have thoroughly researched it, very well documented in terms of citations. So tell us what the churches and these pastors have done to trade the truth for a leftist agenda.
Hey, Jenna. Well, thanks for having me. The process of writing this book really started with something that you and I have talked about a lot. And, just to give it a general broad term, how wokeness was coming into the church on all number of subjects, whether it was racial grievance or pushing amnesty policies when it comes to immigration, or even the COVID lockdowns. A lot of people noticed it then. And people just started asking, why are our large ministries, well-known pastors, sort of pushing this leftist agenda on us? And I think we all kind of at the same time around, 2019, 2020, started to take notice of it. And then alarm bells grew much bigger as it became much more overt. So part of what I started to do was just dig down deep into that. And what I came to find out was that in a lot of cases, this was not organic. It was being very deliberately orchestrated by large left-wing foundations that are funded by well-known left-wing billionaires, people like George Soros or eBay founder Pierre Omidyar, who is a Buddhist, and of course, George Soros is an atheist. So what we were seeing really was that all of this was being pushed to manifest very deliberate political objectives. And so that's what they were doing. And as I looked into it, you tended to see the same types of evangelical organizations come up again and again. And to give you just one example, National Association of Evangelicals were routinely involved with these organizations that were being funded by these left-wing foundations and these left-wing billionaires. And so that's really what this book is about, is it traces the money, it traces the personalities, and it traces just who is bringing this in and why.
And this is so important because a lot of these efforts, as you said, are coordinated or at least appear to be. And so when you see how much of this leftist agenda and their money and their influence is pervading into churches that have gone soft, then it stands to reason why the church is essentially capitulating to the culture and is being invaded from the inside, and then the message is watered down. And so you had mentioned in a previous article of First Things about this, a group that's called the After Party, or this curriculum from Russell Moore, David French, and some of these others. This is a great example of one of those types of curriculum where they're trying on purpose to give churches, under the auspices of, hey, here's a great package and here's some good tools to help you figure out how to discuss divisive politics, that are actually coming from a leftist progressive agenda rather than fundamentally based on truth. So what are some other examples that pastors and church members need to be aware of, just so that they can kind of have the red flags and actually be able to notice when this happens?
Right. And that was a great example. That particular curriculum is called the After Party. And as you and I had discussed, it is funded by, well-known hard left foundations like Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. We all know the Rockefellers, and the Hewlett Foundation, which is the second largest funder of Planned Parenthood. And Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors, by the way, funds things like a gender affirming care for minors to ensure that they are able to receive quote unquote care, which really means puberty blockers, cross-sex hormones, and mutilation of their sexual function. So when you look at other examples, you could literally take just about any issue that is a political priority to the left and find this coming into the church through a lot of these same bad actors. Another example would be environmentalism and sort of climate change alarmism. So there is a group called the Evangelical Environmental Network. They are heavily involved with the National Association of Evangelicals. They are very closely connected with Christianity Today. And of course, that means their editor-in-chief, Russell Moore. And so they've been bringing in what are very anti-human fossil fuel policies and legislation under the guise of creation care. They call it creation care, but what they're really lobbying for is extreme government regulation on drilling, on fracking. And so those policies impact all of our neighbors. Well, when you dig down deep into where it's coming from, you come to find out that all of these left-wing organizations, including Soros, the Clinton Foundation, again, the Hewlett Foundation, that they have been funding all of this. So what they do is they fund these sort of quasi-Christian looking ministries, and you later find out that these are really front groups for left-wing foundations, and they're creating what you can think of as AstroTurf campaigns. And AstroTurf, of course, if you're not familiar with that in terms of journalism and politics, just means the appearance of something grassroots that is in fact very artificially manipulated.
And that is so important to understand how these churches are being manipulated. And it's occurring to me, Megan, as we're talking about all of this, I mean, the left is always suggesting that Christians need to stay out of politics, stay out of policy. And yet here is the left, who wants to have just a secular state, actually coming in and invading the churches and their message and trying to affect policy through then the churches, purveying this type of ideology that's actually inconsistent with Christianity. So they can't have it both ways. If they want to
Right.
really say there's a separation of church and state, and hold on to that kind of myth, then they need to stay out of the churches as much as they want the churches to stay out of politics and policy. But we know as Christians, obviously Christians should engage, but we need to engage with truth. So this is so important that you're bringing these details to light. And in just the last minute we have for this segment, I'm going to hold you over to the next one because I have a lot more questions. What has been the main response from a lot of these pastors and also the left as you are publishing this book that's out in July?
Well, it's been pretty much a very diverse response, but in two broad camps. One has been a lot of people who have said, I knew it. I knew something was happening. I knew something didn't feel right. And I wondered where this was coming from. And this is giving me answers. And then you have these groups and these pastors and these leaders who are doing this sort of thing. And they have been, I will say, behind the scenes over the last few months, very stridently working to prevent this book from coming out. I mean, I've kind of faced obstacle after obstacle from letters to my
We'll hear
publisher.
about that more. We got to have a hard break here, but let's hear more about that on the flip side when we come back with more on Jenna Ellis Tonight. Continuing my conversation with Megan Basham, who is with the Daily Wire and has a brand new book that you absolutely have to read. And Meg, right before the break, you were talking about some of the response, from some of these evangelical leaders and some of these progressive groups that you've named in the book that maybe aren't so happy about it.
Yeah, exactly. So my publisher has received letters saying, hey, we're very concerned about how we might be represented. And we have so many associations in common. Can we talk about this? Which, it feels like there's sort of an implied threat there. I have personally received cease and desist letters, do not go forward with this book, or we're going to sue you, things of that nature. And, thankfully, publisher has stood behind me. I have every intention of going forward. And that's really because this is a very journalistic work. I mean, what I do here is I give hard citations on where the money is coming from, where it's going, and to whom, and how it's being used, in addition to showing how a lot of these pastors and ministry leaders have then taken up these causes. And, in some cases, it is that they're being directly funded. A lot of that going on that I detail in this book. But there's also a lot of pastors who you could say have built public personas and platforms based on pushing some of this left-wing ideology on things like CRT and racial grievance. You've seen a lot of big pastors who have received adulation from the media. They've received plaudits. They become very well known for these issues. So in some cases, it's extremely transactional and very clear to trace. But in other cases, you can just see sort of the cultural impact and the cultural influence of wanting to be seen well in the eyes of the world. And so that happens a lot in this book too. So what I really try to do, because it was not possible to cover all of it. I mean, I can be really frank with you that there has been so much of this going on over the last decade, particularly in the last few years, that it would have required a volume of books to cover all of it. So what I try to do is arm readers with really hard citations so they know, okay, these are the really big ministries where it's happening, but also to arm them with the clues and the evidence for here's how you know when your spidey senses should tingle and you feel like, hey, this doesn't feel right. This doesn't feel like this is coming from scripture. It feels like it's coming from culture. How to know when that's happening and what to do when you sense it happening. Because, we don't want to be divisive. We don't want to be belligerent. But at the same time, scripture tells us to contend for the faith. and to be on the lookout for people who are trying to bring worldly ideology and new doctrines into the church.
Yeah, well, maybe you'll end up with a trilogy or more. But as you're
Right.
describing this with with the pastors and some of these players who want these advantages rather than fulfilling their mission and their calling to be shepherds and protect their flock, have you seen that there's a lot of these pastors that understand what's going on and they're willingly letting these influences infiltrate their churches, or are a lot of these pastors who are using some of this curriculum, like for example the after party that we discussed, that they are really taken in by not understanding where the subsidies are coming from, who's funding these programs, and they genuinely think that it's good. They just maybe aren't exercising good discernment and due diligence.
Right. And I think that there are sort of two types of ministry leaders and pastors we're talking about here. I think there are absolutely some who are intentionally involved with this. They have made a choice to partner with some of these left-wing foundations, and we know what's happening with them. In those cases, I think you can unequivocally say they are selling out their pulpits. They are selling out the people who follow and trust their ministries intentionally. But I think there's another group that is not doing this intentionally. They don't necessarily know where the money is coming from. What they see is big name pastors and leaders that they trust and maybe personal friends with, who are signing on to these particular letters that are being published in the New York Times, or big statements that are being sent up to Congress, and they haven't really thought it through. They get the personal pressure. Hey, we're all signing this. Rick Warren is signing this. Tim Keller signed this. Don't you want to be a part of it too? And I think two things are at work. One, it may be simply the personal relationships make you want to be a part of it. And I think there's also a fear of being left out. They're going, oh gosh, all the big name guys are a part of this, and I want to be a part of this too. And so they sign on without necessarily understanding this is not a general statement of principles that you're signing on to. These are very deliberate political actors who are pushing a political movement with the aim of affecting legislation. And so I think that's what we keep coming back to. And I love that you brought up, at the same time, you will see some of these same guys, and Russell Moore at now Christianity Today, but formerly the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, which is the policy arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, the largest Protestant denomination in the US. What he had been previously very active in is warning that Christian nationalism, which to me is a slur term, a propaganda term designed to make people afraid of Christians exercising their rights in the public sphere, their constitutional rights to free speech, free assembly, to exercise their vote in the same way as their neighbors, creating sort of a scare around that. At the same time, he's deeply involved with these left-wing foundations to bring explicit legislation into the pews and push it into regular church members, and to try to mobilize them to vote for things that in many cases they don't feel very good about and they have questions about. But if you can even just suppress that vote, then you remove an obstacle to the left-wing agenda. And I really think there are some very specific actors, Russell Moore would be one of the examples, who have acted in that way in a very deliberate fashion.
Yeah, we're seeing the infiltration even more and more through Christian media. I mean, like Christianity Today, for example, and some of these other curriculums and all of the things that you mentioned in this book, especially Shepherds for Sale, Meg Basham, that really the lesson here, I think, is that every pastor and every church member has to be deliberate. They have to be discerning, and they have to exercise due diligence of what comes into their church, what curriculums they use. Because it's so easy to just say, oh, hey, this is a packaged product, and we can, and this is trustworthy because it comes from my friend or this good source, but you don't necessarily know that they've vetted it properly. So in just the last minute we have here, what is your main message to pastors who are finally awakening to all of this that's actually going on?
Well, the first thing I would say is that, one, it is happening. I think a lot of people, like I said, have felt this discomfort and just sort of a concern, but they weren't really able to put a name to it. And they felt maybe a little like, maybe I'm being paranoid. you're not, it's happening. So my big message is you're not paranoid. This is happening. And then the second thing to some of these leaders who I maybe are just feeling the personal pressure or the subculture within Christian media to join on to things, I want to say don't do that. As you said, vet where your materials are coming from. If some big ministry comes along and offers to give you a bunch of free curriculum with buzzwords like creation care or welcoming the stranger when it comes to immigration.
And we got to wrap there, but yeah, absolutely vet everything. Meg Basham, and the book is Shepherds for Sale. We'll be right back with more. This week was just an amazing display of the sheer stupidity that never ends from Democrats. And it's great to just be able to sit back and laugh and think, what on earth are you saying? So the first clip that we have comes from AOC, and she is arguing on a podcast that bridges and, yes, even commutes are racist. Listen to this.
There is a psychic weight to living in communities that are designed to be disconnected. It affects your social life. My neighborhood that I'm from in the Bronx and Parkchester, we have some of the longest commutes in all of New York City. It is a commute not just to work, it is a commute to do anything. It is a commute to connect socially. It is a commute to connect spiritually. These decisions are designed to disconnect, disempower, and isolate people. And when you layer that with a lot of Robert Moses's racist intent, to very much do so to a very specific kind of people, Black, brown, low income, poor, etc. You can really see how it actually builds in organizing challenges to communities who actually want to empower themselves.
You just gotta laugh. But wait, it gets even worse. So New York Governor Kathy Hochul was speaking on a panel, and she actually suggested that Black people don't understand what a computer is. Yeah, really, listen to this one.
Young Black kids growing up in the Bronx who don't even know what the word computer is. They don't know. They don't know these things. And I want the world open up to all of them, because when you have their diverse voices innovating solutions through technology, then you're really addressing society's broader challenges.
Well, I guess we must not have any Black kids that are watching this show because they must not know any technology. But let's bring in Jeff Hunt, who is a Salem radio host in the city of Denver, state of Colorado. And Jeff, where do you even want to begin?
Well, so let's start with the Democrats' favorite movie, the never-ending story of systemic racism, right? There's no difference between Democrats and magicians because they can pull things out of thin air. Let's start with AOC, right? The idea that being far removed from things is somehow racist. I'm far removed on our ranch way outside the city of Denver. I like it that way. I don't consider it racist that I have to drive 40 minutes to get milk. I mean, the idea that somehow people, because they're far away, isolated, have long commutes, have somehow faced systemic racism is just wild. But going back to the governor, too, right? There you have the bigotry of low expectations with the benevolent white savior there to show up. No wonder African Americans and Hispanics are leaving the Democrat Party in droves, right? Like, what are you actually getting from these people? How are they benefiting your life? Take the city of Denver, for instance, Jenna. In the city of Denver, only 20% of middle school students are performing at grade level in mathematics in the government-run schools. I mean, if you're inner city, if you're African American, you're Hispanic, you're asking yourselves, what are you getting from the Democrat Party other than just the bigotry of low expectations? I got to bring back a little bit of memory here for you, Jenna. Do you remember Julia from the Obama campaign back in 2012? She was
Oh,
the kind of
yeah.
single woman that ate bugs, lived with her cat, and relied on the government for everything. That's the only people that are going to be left supporting Democrats right now. The life of Julia was actually a prophecy coming forward from the Obama campaign. So,
Oh,
no,
wow. That was a blast from
it's
the past.
they're just, I mean, they're overtly racist at this point. Could you imagine just being labeled that you can't even operate a computer because of your race? Unbelievable.
Well, and apparently you can't get a driver's license or an ID card, an identification card, if you are African American or a minority, according to the Democrats, and you also can't hire a lawyer. I mean, there are so many other things that I just wasn't aware that based on your skin color is apparently the line that the Democrats want to draw. But of course, it's the right wing and the Trump supporters that are the racist ones. But Jeff, I think that the Democrats owe me reparations because I am like a 10-hour flight from Paris. And that affects my life. I mean, and so the fact that I can't just commute to downtown Paris and sip on a great, European cappuccino, where is AOC with all of these problems? I mean, I think that she owes me, right?
I mean, look at everything you're facing, right? The economy's bad, the border's bad, schools are bad, Ukraine, Israel, all the stuff falling apart on the international level. And what are they talking about? Racist roads and the fact that Black people can't use computers. They're so far out of touch. Look, the Democrats' favorite TV show, The Amazing Race, because they're so race obsessed, they think it has to do something with that. They're just wild in their obsession with this and ignoring the real problems that people are facing. So they're bringing this up. At the end of the day, all they have is orange man bad, right? They even go race there. That's the only thing that they can talk about because they can't talk about issues.
Yeah, that's a great point. They're even pointing out Trump's skin color, which, that should be a racist comment. Why aren't people getting thrown off of social media and so forth for, saying orange man bad? But, of course, we would be the ones that are against free speech and all of that. But to your point earlier, Jeff, I mean, who are the people who are actually voting Democrat these days when you see the policies that Joe Biden has put in? You see the problems in this country that affect every person, regardless of your race or where you live or how long your commute is. And yet we see that the polls show that Joe Biden and Donald Trump are virtually tied. I mean, how is it possible that people are genuinely that stupid that they would vote for Democrats?
Well, the big question is, what are you getting out of it after all this? We talk about that with Jews as well within the Democrat Party. I mean, literally members within the Democrat Party, even here in Colorado, are openly anti-Semitic. And you're like, really? Supporting that party still? Or, what they're delivering in Democrat controlled areas. Life is not good. So why do you continue to believe that they're providing or going to deliver on any of their promises? So at this point, it's time to abandon the Democrat Party. Their bigotry used to be kind of soft bigotry of low expectations. It's now on full display. And if you're a Black American, Hispanic American, anybody else, the only people left in the Democrat Party at this point are white women that have some form of Marxist guilt, right? Just leave the Democrat Party, at least give the Republicans a try. You remember the economy was better under Donald Trump, at least, right?
Yeah. It's only, the pink and purple haired that I guess, we also can't comment on because that's bigotry. But Jeff Hunt, we'll be back with more of the stupidity of the Democratic left when we come right back. And we're back with Jeff Hunt, who is a Salem, Denver radio host. And Jeff, speaking about more stupidity that is just so easily mockable from the left, this week, the Met Gala took place, which is actually a big fundraiser for the Democrats and the leftists. And we get a lot of great pictures and mockable memes from all of their clothing, which included AOC's famous Tax the Rich dress. But this year's theme was J.G. Ballard's The Garden of Time. This was my comment on X. I tweeted this: "These people at the Met Gala genuinely look possessed. Tell me this isn't demonic." Well, also Piers Morgan had this take: "The Met Gala seemed very low on A-list stars and very high on C-list strippers." Jeff Hunt, let's look at some of these dresses and you can give me your take
Yeah, well, we're definitely back into the Marilyn Manson age with some of these dresses. I think they'll pop them up there. Yeah, this very kind of gothic look there. That you'll see in the supermarket here soon, right? It's kind of like a blueberry take and got that. Yeah, there's the goth fest right out of Marilyn Manson. I went through a goth phase in 7th grade. My parents didn't take pictures of me for good reason during that time. There's another, there's a wonderful brown dress. I think that's she looks like a tree at that point. I think she's supposed to be kind of the bark and lower part of a tree there. There was one lady that actually had live butterflies. Did you see this? PETA was angry at her because she had live butterflies going around in her dress. So you can't even make PETA happy. I bet the butterflies had a good time. Could you imagine what that experience was like, being for a butterfly? And they always kind of put animals in that category of persons. Why don't you take into account they might have actually had fun? Sarah Jessica Parker, by the way, had a dress that looked like the thing you put over hot dogs at a picnic to keep the flies going off of them. It must have been a hard time for the celebrities trying to decide where they should be. Should they be in the Met Gala, or should they be outside with all the pro-Palestinian, pro-terrorist protesters taking place that we're trying to break in? Because in both circumstances, they were perfectly welcome because their politics are the same. No, you want to talk about out of touch? I mean, the Met is the only place where you can wear a chandelier on your head and still be underdressed. It's the weirdest thing.
Yeah, Jeff, I mean, this is just so ridiculous because, all of these goths with these weird clothing and, the purple hair and everything. I mean, I couldn't really tell. Are they coming to the Met Gala with their Garden of Time apparel, or are they actually the students from Columbia and the Palestinian protesters that are all of these, queer theory enthusiasts? You can't really tell with leftists anymore. I mean, and there was one actress, I think it was, somebody who's a leftist celebrity who comes to the Met Gala, and she literally had a dress that was that was supposed to be sand, like in the time capsule, that was so stiff that her entourage had to carry her each step and like literally physically pick her up and put her on the next step. And I'm thinking, if this isn't a symbol of leftist entitlement full on display and elitism, then what is it? I mean, to our previous point, like, why is anybody thinking that the Democrat leftist agenda is remotely relevant to the things that matter today?
Right. Just compare what's happening in Manhattan right now. On one part of town, you have the Met Gala, right, with people that are just living a totally different life than everybody else. And they've got a 100% Joe Biden voting rate in that room. You also have the Palestinian pro-Hamas camps that are taking place. Again, 100% leftist liberals. And then where's Donald Trump? He's in a cold courtroom, forced to listen to this testimony against him. If that's not a picture of America right now and the leadership, the elite leadership that's taking place, it reminds me of the White House Correspondents' Dinner. They're all celebrating each other there. Meanwhile, people can't even put gas in their cars. Groceries and inflation has driven all that up. Healthcare, education, all the problems we're having at the border, the actual issues that Americans are facing, they're not facing at any way at all, especially if someone's having to carry you upstairs wearing a sand dress. Okay? We're not even in the same universe anymore, Jenna.
No, I mean, it's so ridiculous. And then you get all of these fawnings like, the Vanity Fair and the E and the leftist entertainment drivel, like you have the political leftist media. You also have the entertainment that are just fawning all over these as if like, oh, this is some, really amazing expression of fashion. And it's like the weirdest possible thing that goes against reality is the greatest invention to them, because all they want to do is tear down the concepts of beauty, of genuine fashion, of things that are actually related to reality. But I thought the Babylon Bee had the best headline, speaking of that contrast between the Met Gala and the ridiculous people there and Donald Trump. They had an image that showed Trump in a dress like what AOC wore to the Met Gala, except the red on his train was "the elections are rigged." I thought, wouldn't that have been hilarious if Trump had gone from the Manhattan courtroom and actually shown up at the Met Gala like that? I mean, can you imagine the press meltdown?
I mean, look at these pictures right now. That one guy dressed in silver. Oh my goodness. look, we just live. Look at that. Like, what is he going to do afterwards? And what happens if he gets cold? Does he have a jacket that goes with that outfit? I mean, it's not exactly warm out right now. Or if it rains, how is that? Oh my, look at that. Is that even appropriate? That's not even appropriate for television. My goodness.
No.
Yeah, the rest
this
of
is why we're in
America
prime
looks
time,
at that.
because most of the little kids are asleep by now, so we can unfortunately show this. But oh my gosh, and here's the
There's
sand
the
lady.
sand.
Look at her. Look at her. It's
Oh
so
my goodness.
it's outrageous. I mean, it's so beyond, like it's indescribable how despicably just lavish this is. I mean, it's an exercise
Over the
in
top.
look at me and over the top on purpose. And yet this is the party, Jeff, that wants to suggest that they can relate, to the single woman who's going through an unplanned pregnancy, for example, or, the young people in the Bronx who apparently, according to AOC, have racist commutes. I mean, it just, the contrast is just astounding.
Go back to Julia. That's all that's left of the Democrat Party right now. Barack Obama's Julia. It's all just kind of single people. The rest of us are trying to figure it out, don't care about this. In fact, I really had to dig on conservative Twitter to find anything about it. It's just not part of our universe. But look, the Republican parties and Democrat parties have changed, right? It used to be Mitt Romney in 2012 and Country Club Republicans. They're not part of the Republican Party movement anymore. We're more grassroots. We're more blue collar. We're trying to survive. That's the heart of the Republican Party these days. That's why Donald Trump's tapped into it.
Yeah, and we live in reality, and isn't that a beautiful thing? Jeff Hunt, thanks so much. Appreciate your commentary. That's all the time we have for Jenna Ellis tonight. Make it a great weekend.